Nice. Okay, team. So a team meeting. I am super excited to have Erin Green here. Erin, go ahead and shake your hand. Some of you know her, some of you don't. I've worked with Erin for how many years now, Erin? Have we known each other?
We met in 2011, 12 here in Boise at Boise 70.3 before I was a pro, but then I hired you as my coach in 2018, 2017, 2018, somewhere in there. So
Yeah,
yeah,
so a
it's been
long
a minute.
time. We've each other for a while. Coached Erin, had the pleasure of coaching her through her professional career. Really outstanding athlete, and just an excellent dietitian, nutritionist, athlete. So she has all the tools because she not only does she have the education and the tools, but she also has the experience of being out there. So it's not just someone who's got the lab experience and the book experience, but she also has been out there beating the ground herself as a top athlete. So she really knows and has worked with the full spectrum of everything from youth to college athletes, team athletes, strength athletes, endurance athletes, in hospitals. The list goes on, and we really enjoy having her as a coach at the camp as well. So excellent with that. And I'm going to post for you guys her website if you want to get in touch with her. And she is now my go-to person for the team with anything that is, nutrition related, that is, above my pay grade on just basic general advice. She's the expert that we go to. So super excited to have her here. And mostly, I really am excited to pick her brain and have, as you know, with these team meetings, our goal is to have it be an interactive, and you guys ask a lot of questions. So hopefully you've come with some questions, she's come with some material, but we really want to talk about the difference in nutrition for masters athletes versus when you're a younger athlete. So there's youth, there's development, there's when you're in your 20s and then 30s, and then most of us are masters athletes who are, above the age of 35, 40, 50, that age range. And so how does that nutrition change? I have some specific questions prepared, and so hopefully we're going to all walk away from this with some really good information. So from here, I'm going to turn the table over to Erin, and yeah, let you take it from there. Thanks for being here.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. And I really want to keep this informal. I haven't like prepared a presentation or anything, but I do want to start with just a few things that I encounter in my practice and that we know about the aging athlete when it comes to nutrition. Um, I think one of the first things I want to talk about is this tendency for athletes as we get older to notice changes physically that we can see in our bodies, body composition, maybe like just the way things are stored differently in different places on our bodies, and our tendency to want to try and control that. Like, no, 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 I need to stay lean. I need to, keep whatever is gathering around my midsection. I need to change that, or I need to stay small so I'm light going, over those hills, that kind of thing. I see a lot of masters athletes that just aren't eating enough. And so that's the first thing I want to talk about is the way you fueled, in your younger years still applies to fueling in your older years. So that frequency of eating, starting with a good breakfast, getting protein sources, really strong carbohydrate sources throughout the day, being prepared with snacks, making sure you fuel well during your workouts, all of that stuff still applies. What I would invite you to, just observe within yourself is how appetite might be a little bit different for you. So some people, as we age, we find out actually we need a little bit less than what we ate, in our 30s and maybe even 40s or younger. Um, but your appetite might be changing. So when I say like bring awareness to that and pay attention, that is a strong indicator of how often you need to eat, maybe the quality of the nutrition you're getting. Because if you have a lower appetite, because we're aging, we're masters athletes, maybe we don't quite need as many calories. The quality of those calories really needs to be there because you're actually eating less volume of food. And so we just don't quite have as much wiggle room to, eat the discretionary calories that maybe we did in our 20s and 30s. Um, On top of that, I would say that expect your fueling plan during exercise to change. Be flexible with that. I have worked with a number of athletes that something, and I myself have experienced this where something started working out really well for like many years. And then one season I try that same thing again, same product, same timing, and it doesn't work. And there's a lot of speculation around this. We don't exactly have answers why this happens to athletes because, I mean, masters athletes, especially in the Ironman realm or half Ironman endurance realm, just aren't studied. And so we don't have clear answers, but we suspect, digestion changes as we age. Our tolerance to certain products and certain combination of nutrients can change. Just your needs might change. You might need more or less than you did, 10 years ago. And so, being flexible there. So that's kind of a broad overview. We can get into more specifics, talk about specific nutrients and things. But I wanted to present that as a way of hopefully kind of inviting some flexibility and open-mindedness that, hey, things are expected to change as we age. Our bodies change, on the inside and the outside. Our fueling needs might change, our appetites might change. You just have to be flexible with all of it. So I'll pause there and see if that sparks up any questions or discussion.
So Erin, I'm going to just list off my little bullet points of things, and they're not necessarily all related to one another, but I have like a little bullet list of things that I'd like you to cover at some point in this hour, just so that I'll put those out there in case there are things that people have on theirs, and then we'll add to that as we go. But the main things I want to talk about is, does protein intake change pound per body weight as we get older versus when we're younger? Carb timing, as far as when you're eating carbohydrates throughout the day, is that something that changes from when we're younger versus when we are older? So, placement of carbs in relationship to workouts or timing of the day. Is our recovery needs on what we need in terms of exactly what we should eat for recovery of workouts, and that in relationship with that timing conversation. So that was a thing. And then the other thing I noticed with athletes as they get older as well is we develop more sensitivities and allergies towards foods we didn't have when we were younger. So how to address and handle those. And maybe that's something that, as like you said, even in your race plan, that pops up. And then the very last thing that is a bit of maybe we can get to it, maybe we don't, but is they talk a lot about creatine being something that you not necessarily need when you're a younger athlete, but as we get older, is creatine something that we need to look at a little bit more as we're aging athletes. So that's my bullet list. Hopefully we can touch on all of those, and there's still lots of room for other people. Maybe those were some of other people's bullet list as well.
Okay. You want me to dive in, or does anybody else have anything to add to that list? I don't know if I can remember it all, but you can ask me questions as we go and dive in. And by all means, if I'm like, rattling off numbers or nutrients or something, and you're like, whoa, 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 I have a question, please speak up, because I want this to be a conversation. I always say that I can learn as much from my audience and my clients as you can learn from me. So let's start with like what the composition of the diet looks like, because protein was mentioned, carbohydrates were mentioned, carbohydrate timing. We might get into some micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, fiber, our foods less tolerated. It does become rather complicated. And I have to say that specifically for women, because we have menopause, it can really get like you feel like you're on a rocky, you're a sea on a ship with like all kinds of waves and whitecaps and stuff going on around you, and you have no clue what direction to turn or what to do. So I want to start with just saying protein intake should be a little bit higher as we age. The purpose for that is to hold on to what lean body mass we do have. As we get older, our bodies just have a harder time holding on to lean body mass, and we prefer fat storage. I like to think of it as our bodies being really wise in this sense. Having a little more body fat actually can be beneficial as people age. And we see this, like if you work with sick populations in hospitals or assisted care facilities, we actually see that some body fat can be beneficial to longevity. So I think it's body wisdom that's happening there when we see that body composition shift. But let's do what we can to maintain what our bodies need as athletes as well. And that high lean body mass and muscle mass is a part of that. It's not just protein alone. You
One
also need
second.
stimulation.
Can
What?
I ask one question on that, a really specific? Can you give us an exact number? So like, let's say
Yeah.
you're 25 and it's per grams of protein per body weight, say you're a 25-year-old athlete versus if you're a 50-year-old athlete, what's the different ratio of like what would be the different calculation for that athlete so we can give people something really specific to work with?
Yeah. Okay. I'm heading there. So
Okay,
thank you.
great.
I will get to some numbers. It's not just protein alone, though. There's also that muscle stimulation that we need. So we need strength training, and those two together with enough protein to maintain that body mass is really what we see actually helps with that body composition. Specifically with numbers now, there's not anything specific in the literature that says a 25-year-old will do better with this many grams. We actually talk in grams per kilo most of the time in the nutrition world, but I'll try and do a little. Sometimes my math is terrible trying to translate over into pounds, but to find your weight in kilograms, you divide pounds by 2.2. So a little extra step for those of us in the in the US using pounds. But there's nothing that really says, oh, a 25-year-old can, have this many grams per kilo and a 50-year-old needs this many grams per kilo. What we see is that there's like I guess the floor kind of raises for that 50-year-old, meaning the minimum you can get away with becomes a little bit higher than maybe that 25-year-old. The RDA for protein is zero point 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, but the sports nutrition literature has been very vocal that that's not enough for most athletes. Most athletes is recommended 1.2 grams per kilo up to 2.0 grams per kilo in like strength sports or in situations where we're really trying to preserve lean body mass. I usually start athletes around 1.2 to 1.5 grams per kilogram. So if you take your body weight in pounds, divide it by 2.2, and then multiply that by 1.2 or 1.5. And that'll give you like a target. And I always like having a range when I'm looking at macronutrients. It's also important to know that like that range it's kind of your guardrail. It doesn't mean you have to start counting grams every day. It doesn't mean that, oh, if I only ate 80 grams of protein this day, oh my gosh, it's no. It gives you kind of a target. And what I invite people to do is then start like looking at where your protein comes from and getting to know like what sources of protein am I eating? Oh, look, chicken, 3 ounces of chicken has like 20 plus grams of protein. But if I eat a half a cup of beans, I'm only getting like 12 grams of protein. So just knowing how it adds up. Oh, look, I get protein from bread. I didn't realize that. More protein in cottage cheese than in, the yogurt I'm choosing. Those kinds of things can really just build awareness in athletes and help you kind of put together those meals so that you are getting close to that target. The last thing I'll say about this protein in this context is spread it throughout the day. So get a strong protein source at breakfast, strong protein source at lunch, strong one at dinner. The tendency for a lot of people is to have a low protein breakfast or kind of like midway, and then it grows throughout the day and we'll have like big protein in the evening. But our bodies do really well with having a steady stream of really strong protein doses throughout the day.
Quick question. Can you get that all through plant-based or do you need, I'm primarily vegan, but do eat fish and some other sources of protein, but
Yeah. Yeah, the answer is yes, you can. The caveat is it's a larger volume of food. So if I use like the chicken versus the beans analogy just a few minutes ago. If you start thinking about like how much, beans do I need to eat to get 24 grams of protein versus how much chicken do I need to eat?
Right.
The volume really is there. I've seen some really great high protein diets in vegan athletes and plant-based athletes. It totally can be done. But it really takes intention, and it really takes knowing how your protein adds up in these different ways. And it might even take a protein supplement. So, when we might talk about supplements a little later when we talk about creatine and stuff, but a protein supplement can be hugely beneficial for athletes just because of the convenience of it. If you find a pea-based protein or a soy-based protein that you like, yep, you can have that after your workout. That's probably the first place I would start implementing that is, hey, after your workout is a great start. Usually gives you 20 grams of protein per dose. That's a really good start toward that, 100 grams or whatever you might need in the day.
Right. I'm good on that. Marilyn says I need more real food though, because I get plenty of the powder. So
Yeah,
thank you.
you're welcome.
So the next thing I had on my list there, Erin, was carb timing, how that changes possibly for masters athletes versus younger athletes, and timing throughout the day and in relationship to workouts, if there's some shifts and changes that are key for not only performance recovery and body composition.
Mm-hmm. As people age, because of the shifts in our body composition and because of shifts in appetite, as we age, we just don't need as much food. That happens, per decade, we lose a little bit of our resting metabolic rate per decade. So we're eating less overall. So again, back to that, well, quality needs to be there. Timing is also important with this. So when we look at carbohydrate, it totally makes sense to target the, oh, sorry, my cat is vomiting in my office. Sorry.
That's awesome. It's totally acceptable on this call.
Startled me. I was like, here he goes. Okay, well, I'll have something to clean up when I'm done here. So as far as timing with carbohydrates, it makes sense to want to have those carbohydrates around the activity. So I like to say you sandwich your activity with carbohydrates. This isn't to say that you can't eat them, farther away, at breakfast or at dinner or whatever, if your workouts are mainly in the middle of the day. It just means that needs to be prioritized around the workouts. And I've seen particularly aging women struggle with this because we hear all these things through menopause and what we should and shouldn't eat. And we, start redistributing how our fat is stored. And so we think we need to, cut the carbohydrates out. But that can be hugely detrimental for performance. It can be detrimental for recovery. And don't forget that your brains run off of carbohydrates as well. And so it's not just for the activity that we need those carbohydrates. But if people are looking for a place to start, I would say, look at where your workouts are. Make sure you're going into it well fueled with carbs. Make sure you're backing that workout up with replenishing the glycogen, because no matter how long until your next workout, you're going to need those stored carbohydrates to fuel that next workout. As far as amount of carbohydrates, I'll just add that, we do use grams per kilo there too. And the range even for masters athletes that are endurance athletes is 6 to 10 grams per kilo per day. So start doing the math on that and you start realizing like, holy cow, that's a lot of carbohydrates. When people see this, they're like, well, how the heck am I supposed to eat that many carbs? Well, guess what? Jam is a carb, maple syrup is a carb. Jelly beans are a carb. I'm not saying you build your diet off of these things. I'm just saying this is where the all foods fit approach comes in to sports nutrition, that we're not just trying to get those carbohydrates from a high fiber, like whole sources. It's really important to meet those carbohydrate needs by adding some of those simple carb foods in a lower volume that really bump up that overall carbohydrate intake.
Any questions from anyone on that? So how about allergies or sensitivities that develop later on? It can be, different things, even salt sensitivities and how you process that stuff. You hear a lot of people become a little bit more gluten intolerant, different sensitivities pop up that you hear all the time. Oh, I didn't have this problem when I was younger, but now I do.
hmm I have encountered this, and I'm really sorry if anybody is dealing with this because it can be super disruptive to your life. Particularly as athletes, we tend to have like go-to foods, right? Like, oh yeah, this is my standard breakfast. Well, all of a sudden, you can't tolerate eggs or something anymore. I mean, it can happen. I can't tell you the exact mechanism. Um, Something way beyond my understanding of body chemistry and endocrine function and all of that. What I can tell you is it's important for you to know that you can find a way out of that. Like you can find a way to still be well fueled and to find products that work for you and work around that sensitivity. I've had clients come to me and say, like, I can't tolerate dairy anymore. And when I start kind of asking them more questions, it turns out it's probably a lactose issue, which is the most common, but it's also like the easiest to fix because not only can you have lactose free or low lactose foods, but you could take a lactate pill, an enzyme that literally helps you break down that lactose so it doesn't cause problems anymore. Similarly with certain sports products, there's 1,000 of them on the market for that reason. So if there's a product that you've been using for a very long time, suddenly it's not working, there's other products out there that you can try. And websites like the Feed are really great for that because you can get one-off products that you can just try a package of this or try like a couple servings of this and see if it works. And reach out to, I mean, if you reach out to your coach, reach out to me, I'm happy to offer some feedback on that kind of stuff. When it does come to like sensitivities, I'll say that some people start eliminating things preemptively without really knowing what they're doing, and that can actually cause more issues. So I don't know if anybody here has heard of the low FODMAP diet. FODMAP is, and it's um, what's the word I'm looking for? Where it's like a series of letters that stands for the words. It's like fermentable, oligo, disaccharide, monosaccharide, and polyols. It's basically these fibers that you find in all plant foods that our bodies have a hard time processing. And we don't actually digest them. The little bugs in the microbiome do. Anyway, the low FODMAP diet came out years ago and it was designed as an elimination diet. Let's take out these things, calm down the gut, find out what was causing the issue, and then we slowly start adding these things back in one by one. Well, people grabbed the low FODMAP diet and they just eliminated a bunch of stuff and then they never added it back in. And I was at a conference actually a couple years later and like asked this GI specialist that was speaking if they heard about this. And she said, oh yeah, I work with the doctor at Monash University that designed this diet. And now he's studying people that have built these FODMAPs and are now experiencing the consequences of that because their gut health just went like, totally bonkers because they weren't getting the fiber they needed. So that's a long story just to say, if you think you have a sensitivity, I would really suggest seeing an expert in some realm, whether it's a GI doctor or a dietitian that has experience in that before you really go down the road of eliminating a bunch of stuff. But if it's a specific product or a specific food that is not working for you, there's a way to work around it.
Erin, can you complete the macronutrient picture and just talk about fat?
Sure. So we go, a lot of times we will build diets off of percentage of calories. So there's a system called the Acceptable Macronutrient Distribution Range, AMDR. And if you Google, AMDR, nutrition, it'll pop up. It basically says carbohydrates should be 45 to 65% of your total calories. Protein should be anywhere from like 10 to 30%, and fat should be somewhere from like 25 to 35%. So when I'm calculating macros for somebody, those ranges, I will start with protein because that is based on body weight more than anything. So we do grams per kilo with protein. Then I'll go to carbohydrate and I'll look at like, okay, well, what percentage of this person's diet maybe should be carbohydrate? What have they been eating? What are they telling me they're experiencing in training? Most athletes, I won't go below 45%, but I might start them around like 55 to 60% and see where that puts me for fat. And then so it's all just like a pulley system, right? And so we're figuring out the percentage that comes from protein, the percentage from carbs, and then whatever's left over should fall into that 25 to 35% range for fat.
What you talked a little bit about this, but maybe there are others on the call that are more disciplined and diligent. But I think it's unlikely that I'm going to actually count macronutrients, let alone micronutrients. But I am happy to think about, and I do think about quantity and diversity and that kind of stuff. So what's your guidance? If we're probably not the type of person to count.
I love that question, Ben, because I am not the person to ask my clients to count either. So I usually start, I can't share my screen, but I will send you the athlete's plate. It is literally just like a plate of food that kind of shows you the distribution. And what I love about this is the proportions stay the same, but the plate can shrink or grow based on your appetite, based on your training load, based on like how much food you know you need in a day. So if you follow the athlete's plate, counting isn't necessary. That's the beauty of this, is it's translated to a graphic that basically shows you, hey, if you get color, if you get some lean protein, if you get whole grains and starches, and you get some fat sources throughout the day, and you're drinking beverages with those meals, you're going to cover probably like 98% of your nutrient needs and your dietary needs. And then if you think something is off, I always tell clients, let's start here. Let's start with the pattern, the timing of things. And then if we think something needs to be fine-tuned, I'll dig in and do the math, and we'll find a way for you to track that and get some numerical data, so then we can get into the nitty-gritty.
I think you presented that at a camp years and years ago. So I think I remember that diagram.
Yeah, and I'm happy to share it again.
I'll have Erin share that with me, and I'll put it in the team chat for everyone so everyone can see that.
I have a
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
So, where do the gels fit into the numbers? Like, I look at my plate, and like I don't count macros. I just look at my plate, and I got my protein, carbs, and my fat, and then before I get on the bike, I take a gel. But I'm always paranoid that I'm gonna go, and I ask coach all the time, is this gonna make me fat? Because all the sugar. Because I'm scared of taking that gel, but I know I'm burning it off. But do I really need that gel? So can you talk about where the gels fit into the macros or the daily input?
Yeah, totally. That's a great question, because we actually don't include the sports food that's consumed during exercise in with like the macros of the day. So the macros are kind of separate to set up your day, like your overall nutrition, and make sure that's adequate. What the sports fuel is doing is trying to spare your glycogen stores. So glycogen is the stored form of carbohydrate in your body. We can store quite a bit of it. We store it in our muscles and our liver. The bigger the person, the more they'll store, but also the more they'll use during exercise, because they're a larger body. So in general, the body can absorb, up to 90 grams. We're seeing some cyclists train their guts to absorb more, up to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour. We see some extreme cases where it's 120 grams per hour I've seen. I mean, it gets kind of crazy. But for Ironman athletes, I mean, anywhere between that 70 to 90 grams per hour is a really great start for absorption. What that tells me is that the body is primed to use those carbohydrates. You're never going to be able to eat enough to actually like zero out what your body is using. So take that and just tuck it in a little place that reassures you that you are not going to, get fat from fueling your activity. What we see with increase, just to talk about like what happens when people gain weight, what happens with, excess body fat. People gain weight when there's a caloric surplus. That simply means your body is taking in more calories than it is expending. There are lots of factors on both sides of that equation. I can't possibly go over them all today, but that's not just like eat this, burn that. There's like all kinds of body mechanisms and appetite regulators and endocrine systems that are at work here. So when somebody's like thinking, oh, eating this sugar is going to make me fat, that is just not, I mean, you have to be in a caloric surplus throughout the entire day for that to happen. And I would even say day after day after day, like continually for that to happen. If that's happening, I'll have a conversation with an athlete like, well, so what else is playing into your day with eating, with timing of foods, with your appetite, with stress levels, with access to food and like your ability to cook a nourishing meal or all of these other factors that play into why we eat what we eat. Because 9 times out of 10, it is not the gel on the bike or during the run that's causing the issue. There's something else. Does that answer the question for you a little bit?
Yeah, I know there's a bunch of guys on the call, so I don't want to bring the whole menopause thing, but I'm going to anyway. So I got into the sport right when I hit perimenopause. So my body changed. So I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. And Maryland has seen this for a few years with me, and we're trying to figure out. So I have learned there's research now, and everybody talks about it, that now we have to increase our protein, and you just mentioned that, but we do need to lower our carbs. So I don't know if you can talk about that, if you know anything that you want to share.
Well, I haven't seen anything that argues for lowering it below that 45% of total calories that I talked about.
Okay.
And I'll go back to one of the things when Marilyn asked me about carbohydrate timing. This is a huge, if you listen to any of Stacy Sims' research, she's kind of a pioneer in this area, but I've followed several others in the menopause and perimenopause space. That timing of carbohydrate around the activity is key. So, just to use your example, like taking that gel in the middle of your workout is actually that's a recommended, practice, because you're taking that carbohydrate to fuel the work. It's not like you're taking that gel, later on when you're sitting at your desk working. Like, that's when like food is really important. The color, the fiber, the protein, the whole grains, like the whole foods and that nourishing meal or snack. The gel is a specific tool for that activity. And it's carbohydrate, and it is exactly what your body needs in that moment. Now, I will say there can be a tendency for some athletes to overfuel out of, sometimes, especially if people are new at the sport. I've seen people like get really nervous that like, oh my God, I have this huge ride or run, and it's the first time I've ever done anything this big. And they'll take in, maybe out of panic or uncertainty, they'll take in a little bit more than they really need during that activity. That can happen and cause like GI distress, but unless it's happening like day after day on repeat, that's not going to lead to weight gain. It won't.
If this happened to me on Sunday on a long ride where I overfueled, and I was sort of right at the discomfort. Is there anything to do other than just sort of ride it out?
Yeah. Well, sometimes dehydration can be the culprit of whatever GI distress you're experiencing. And so I would first make sure you're topped up with hydration. The second thing is like, it just takes time for your body to digest that fuel and break it down and ease the discomfort. You can train your gut to increase its absorption, and a lot of people do that, and that's just a systematic practice of, okay, I'm going to edge it up a little bit on this ride, I'm going to increase my grams per hour on this run or whatever, and you just incrementally and gradually start adding more and more into your regimen. I will say that daily overall carbohydrate intake will improve your gut absorption and utilization during exercise as well. So I've seen some of these people that really try and go on this low carb bandwagon, but then they hit this big ride and they try and fuel it like they should, and they have all kinds of problems. Well, it's because their body hasn't been trained outside of the training to absorb and utilize that carbohydrate. So that's something to think about too. the only other thing I'll say is your body is more likely to clear that carbohydrate and digest it if you bring down the intensity a notch. Because what happens when we start working at a higher intensity, the blood flow goes to the muscles and the skin for, making sure the muscles have everything they need and cooling the skin. It's not going to the digestive tract. And so in order to try and, redistribute that blood and that energy to digestion, if you bring down intensity, that's often why, like, if we, hit gut issues in an Ironman or something and you start walking for 10 minutes, you might start feeling a little better. You just kind of relaxing that stress on the gut.
I jump in on the preschool level.
Love it.
Again,
Please.
fueling, I think my longest bike ride now is up to 2 hours. I'm not doing anything before that. I just bring water on the ride. I'm not pre-fueling, I'm not doing anything. So what should I be doing? Should I be pre-fueling? Should I be doing a gel along the way? So again, I know, sorry for all of you that have PhDs in this, but how should I be doing the nutrition as I start, and getting longer and longer in my workouts?
Yeah. So, to keep it simple, because there's a lot of stuff we can get into the weeds with this, and there's a lot of different scenarios that lead up to that timeline where you start your ride. So I always work backwards. Like if it's like an evening ride, work back like 3 to 4 hours ahead of time. That's when you want to have like your final substantial meal. Where you're a plant-based athlete, you might want to consider how much fiber is in that meal. You definitely want to target carbohydrates, a mix of protein, keep it easily digestible. You can still eat in the hours leading up to your ride, but you want to watch the complexity of that. Again, carbohydrate based. Keep it maybe smaller in portion size. So as you're moving closer and closer to that practice time or that training time, we're kind of whittling down the portion size and the complexity of the food. I have seen people eat, okay, my husband, for example, will literally eat a dripping peanut butter and jelly sandwich and then go straight upstairs and get on the trainer. I mean, like within 5 minutes. I can't do that. He does it all the time. Sports nutrition conventional wisdom would say that is absolutely not recommended, but it works for him. And so part of this is figuring out what works for you. I've seen people that eat that big meal and then they're fine, like heading into a ride 4 hours later. I, on the other hand, would need to eat something probably an hour out from that ride, just top up stores, kind of keep my blood sugar up. If it's a morning ride, I would say make sure you're getting up a couple hours ahead of time. And that's where, like, I know it's rough being a triathlete. But
Well, I am getting up early and I do all my workouts. I have been doing them in the morning. So that was a question
Mhm.
too. Should I be trying to, a couple
Yeah.
hours early, but anyway.
Yeah. So if you get up and it's like a super early session, I'm imagining those aren't the really long ones. Those are usually the ones crammed in before work. It's like 90 minutes or something. You can get by with much less. You could get up and have a piece of toast and be on your way, or grab like a handful of cereal, or have, a yogurt cup or a piece of a bar or something like that. I've known people that just take a gel and they head to the pool and they do their workout. And then the meal is really prioritized after the workout. So you can do that. Keep in mind that if you eat less going into the workout, the in-workout fueling becomes more of a priority. So if you're well fueled heading into it, you might get away with not eating and drinking as much because your body's totally typed up. But if you don't eat as much going into it, I want you having like gels and chews and snacks and fluid on hand and ready, because even if it's a shorter workout, you could go ride for an hour and not have a problem. You might need it if you're going into that workout low.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Erin, could you talk a little bit about sodium? So my physio is a big advocate of LMNT. And when you read some of the content on their website, they're talking about how, the World Health Organization has decreased sodium intake recommendations and how they think they're far too low and it doesn't follow science. Is there any where are you at with sodium?
Man, it is a salty world out there in the in the influencer space when it comes to salt in water. I actually have a TikTok that has like, I think it's up over 200,000 views because I basically tell people they don't need to add salt to their drinking water, and like people lost their minds and told me I didn't know what I was talking about. For athletes, I don't worry very much about too much sodium because, as you all know, as you all have done, triathlons or at least these long training rides and runs, you know how much sodium can help during that activity and with recovery after, how much you sweat. So I don't worry too much about getting too much sodium as an athlete. That being said, I don't see any reason to be drinking element or adding salt to your drinking water when you have access to food. When you have ready access to food, get your electrolytes from the food. I mean, I can list a dozen salty foods that you can add into your day, whether it's salad dressings, pickles, pretzels, tortillas, bagels. I mean, there's tons of breakfast cereal has a decent amount of sodium. You can reach your sodium needs through food. It's when you don't have ready access to food, especially for a long period of time, when you're constantly shedding electrolytes, that's when we want to look at how is the most efficient way to replace these so that we don't throw our bodies into a chemical issue with dehydration. So yeah, I mean, does that answer it? I don't think the science is terribly behind on this. I actually think that some people that freak out that we need to like, oh, we need more salt and more sodium. I mean, we still have plenty of evidence that says the average person shouldn't be taking in too much salt and that we don't have enough potassium in our diet, and potassium counteracts the sodium. So if you're worried about the amount of salt you're taking in, boost your potassium.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I was just curious.
Mm-hmm. It's a
Barry,
good question. It's a hot topic.
Barry, you had a question too. I want to make sure that we get to everyone's questions before we get to the top of the hour. So let's I want to make sure you get a chance to ask your question as well.
Oh, thanks, Marilyn. I'm kind of curious, Erin. I kind of err on the side of taking in too many carbohydrates, or a ton over an 8-hour event or whatever. And then I start robbing myself of hydration. And so it feels like there's kind of a trade-off here. And I've got a habit of not getting it right, where I stay on top of the calories and then find myself way behind the curve on just the water, the hydration part, and then performance starts to tank.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you stay on top of that balance? Because it almost feels binary to me in terms of my experience.
So, I mean, I have a lot of questions that I would love to, dig into that with you. When you say that you focus more on carbohydrate at the expense of fluid, do you mean that you are more like you're focused so much on eating and taking the carbohydrates in that you forget to drink? Or do you mean like you can't take as much fluid in because your stomach is so full or you're having GI distress or something?
Oh, I've got a cast iron stomach. I can take tons of stuff.
Oh,
So it's
lovely.
really more about even taking liquid carbs in. I feel like, just I can take all this in, but I'm not getting enough just pure hydration.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, I could go one of two directions. You mentioned the liquid carbs, and that was going to be my first suggestion, is to make sure that you're taking fluid when you're taking your carbohydrate. So if you have your fueling plan and you're aiming for 90 grams per hour of carbohydrate, what you do is you figure out, well, how, okay, I'll take a gel, every 20 minutes, let's say. That's about 60 grams. Okay, I need an extra 30 grams per hour, and I can get that from a bottle and a half of sports drink kind of thing. So you sort of that's your fueling plan, and you go out for a long ride and you try it. And I always like trying it on rides first because that's where you're most likely to tolerate it. It's a little bit easier to consume those things throughout the workout. And that's going to be your longest leg of an Ironman or a half Ironman where you're focused on fueling. The other end of the spectrum would be, okay, if you think you're taking too many carbohydrates, let's separate them so that you distinctly know this is carbohydrate fueling, this is hydration. So, and then you figure them out separately. Okay, so you have, gels every whatever, 15 minutes or something, and then you figure out like how many ounces of fluid do I need, and you basically keep them separate and try that out.
And is there a specific, like I like to use the reference 1 bottle per hour when, whether that be about a 750 milliliter bottle per hour, is there, like the carbohydrates and protein, is there sort of a general rule of thumb on measurement on water per body weight or per hour, or it's just
Not
like,
really.
there's a lot of variables in terms of heat and body type and sweat rate, and it's a much deeper question, but if we're going to put
Yeah.
a little like start here on that.
Yeah. The bare minimum for even like a shorter workout is 16 ounces per hour. And then the top end, I mean, I've seen people take 48 plus ounces. I was a 48 ounce per hour Ironman athlete. So that's a massive range. This is why hydration for these endurance activities is so challenging, because a lot of the recommendations actually base it on how much weight did you lose? Well, that's only helpful after the fact. So what do we do? And so you can practice that pre and post weights, and then you have to, there's little calculators, and I can send a sheet so you guys have like a calculator on this. But basically, like, you weigh yourself before you go. You go out for your ride, you keep track of how much you drank, and then at the end you weigh yourself after, and you basically do this calculation, and it'll show you your estimated sweat rate. So that is a tool that you could practice with. But it's really hard to say, like, there isn't a standard blanket, oh, this many ounces per pound or something like that. Yeah, everybody's so different. And the conditions, as you said, are so different.
Sort of going to transition. We're going to take a real left turn on something. With the last little bit of time we have, Ben had a question about glucose monitors. And so, Ben, I'll let you step up there.
Yeah, I'm not a full-blown diabetic, but it has been recommended to me to wear a glucose monitor. Have you seen, I'm sure you've seen it, do you have advice for people who do or do not have diabetes, and the value of wearing one, what you should be looking for? I understand spikes, but generally what you should be looking for.
Yeah. I don't have a ton of experience with CGMs, though I've done a fair bit of reading. I've attended webinars. I have colleagues in the space that work with diabetes that have a lot more experience with it. Yes, look for spikes, and particularly tracking what kind of food you ate. Was it around a workout? Was it first thing in the morning? Like, what time of day? Because there could be a food that we might think, like oatmeal, oh, that's high fiber, and it's, it might totally spike your blood sugar. Now, that's not problematic. Like, our blood sugar goes up and down throughout the day, unless you're functioning like pancreas and blood sugar, regulating mechanisms are compromised. That's when it becomes an issue, which it sounds like that might be, cause for concern or kind of monitoring. So I would look for spikes. I would also look for dips, particularly with exercise. Keep track of, like, well, how long after I start exercise do I start seeing that blood sugar dip? Or do I see like spikes and valleys happening? What happens when I fuel, every 20 minutes versus every half hour? What happens when I fuel with this source versus this source? Those are the things I would probably look at, and start identifying patterns and trends that you can repeat or that you can prevent. That would probably be my suggestion how to use it.
One last one from Christina. Christina, go ahead.
Yeah, I just so one of the things that I'm doing a lot of is these really long distance swimming. So it's a very, like, it's not nearly as intense as like the as Ironmans and the running at the end. And what I was wondering is, like, up to like the 10-hour, 12-hour mark, like the just doing the pure sugar, I feel pretty good. after that, it just the sugar, it starts to just be like, I don't want any more sugar. Is there any benefit to building in like some more protein when you know it's going to be something, you're planning for something that long, looking at like 14, 15, 16-hour things? Building some protein in earlier, are there benefits there, or should I really just be sticking to, figuring out what kind of carbohydrate,
Yeah.
caffeine mixtures help?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question because, conventional sports nutrition would say like, oh, carbs, carbs, carbs. But if you're working at a lower intensity, which a lot of those very long competitions require you to just work at like a very steady aerobic intensity, you can handle a mixed nutrient diet. You just need to practice with it ahead of time and know what to expect. So things like, I just had a conversation with a client this morning about Uncrustables. She wants to have an Uncrustable in T1. And I'm like, go for it. And she goes, oh, my coach said it has too much fat. I'm not sure. And I'm like, well, look, if you're riding at an intensity that's very like low and easy, and you've got tons of oxygen coming in and tons of blood flow to that gut, it might fit just fine. And you're far enough away from the run, it's not going to cause a problem. So for your swimming competition, I would say like if you have certain foods that you can, I'm imagining they hand it to you from a kayak or a boat and you roll on your back and you take the thing. So I would say like knock yourself out. If you can find like a bar or something that works well, or a type of a sandwich, and you can lay there and chew it and swallow it, or if there's a drink that has a more mixed nutrient kind of composition, maybe a soup would work well. I don't know. I mean, you can start getting a little more creative with that. And for those longer competitions, it can just be like fatigue from eating gels and drinks the whole time. You just want to chew something. You want something that tastes like real food. I think that has a huge psychological benefit too.
Thanks.
Erin, we really, really appreciate your time. We've covered a lot of different things here, and I know we started on one topic and went a lot of different directions, which I really appreciate and love. I will say that anyone who has a lot more questions or wants to reach out for individualized either consultation or working with Erin, I posted her site in the sidebar there. I'll post it again in the team chat. She's she's wonderful to work with if you're looking for someone to work with for your your race plans, your overall nutrition plan, questions, consultations. If you want to dive in deeper, please reach out to her. But yeah, we really, really appreciate you taking the time for us. This is all volunteer on her time. So we appreciate you being here for our team and helping guide us through all this stuff. And yeah, and thanks to everyone who showed up tonight. I appreciate that as always. I know that the recorded version is handy, but I appreciate seeing your faces and having the live interaction and questions. So thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here as well. So any last burning desire takeaways that you would like to leave us with, Erin?
Not really. More like keep it as simple as you can. Enjoy the food you eat. Be happy with what your body can do for you as we age, and really celebrate that gift that we all have, that is exercise and competition and stretching ourselves. So nutrition does not have to be a huge factor or hold you back in that realm.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, team. I'll have Erin send me those things, the hydration calculator, the athlete's plate. I'll post her website, and we will post this for to be able to listen back to if you'd like. And yeah, thanks, team. Cheers.
Hey, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Erin.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good night.